Fetz Taylor. Thank you, Charlie. There are three individuals here that need some recognition for their contributive efforts to help this whole procedure happen. First, the dean in 1969 created a situation that I could participate at the University of Montreal, the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture Design Seminar, which their subject matter for the very first time was educational processes involved with factory-built housing. Secondly, Dave Hermanson, whose many trips to Europe created vast itinerary data, many things that we were not able to see, but certainly took advantage of many of them. Next, Uwe Kohler, a native of this area from Berlin, one of the areas that we will see, and you will see many slides thereof, gave us vast numbers of resources, contact people that were able to identify and help us over there. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Norm Lingerman, whose photographic efforts and technical assistance has made this thing hang together, at least so far. I hope we make it. With that as an very brief kind of capsule introduction, I'd like to share with you our experiences of about 90 days wandering and traveling very hurriedly through 14 different countries, 70 major cities, traveling about 16,000 kilometers and trying to examine as carefully as we had an opportunity to factory-built housing in most of Western Europe. What is factory-built housing? What is industrialized building systems for housing? I guess a rather safe definition would say that it is the intent to create off-site, in-factory coordination, fabrication, and construction of as many components as possible prior to arriving at the site. There exist and are potentially a series of merits, and I'd like to run over those just briefly, and then we can get into some visual kinds of things. The opportunity to create more mass production and create pieces for construction into large catalog component inventories. The potential to lower cost, and if you follow construction cost, as most of you do, I'm sure you realize that it's running even in front of our normal cost of living inflation. Better quality control of construction. This is something that all of us in the design world are shooting to attain, higher and better quality. Better dimensional stabilization. One of the very difficult things that today's practicing architect is confronted with is trying to create a set of circumstances that allow all the individual good pieces that he has to work with to get them to fit together. And he spends a lot of time trying to do this, and some assistance along these lines will certainly be beneficial. Less product waste as we become energy conscious and materials conscious, attempting to eliminate scrap and get more use out of the materials we have to work with. Better working conditions. No one likes to be assigned a job responsibility outside, wet weather, cold weather. If we can create better opportunities inside, I think we can also create a better quality product. Fewer wet processes at the construction site. The use of all the things, all the wet kinds of processes at the construction site take time, they're very, very expensive, and very, very limited with respect to weather. Speed at the construction site. Time is dollars, and if we can put months into weeks and weeks into days, we certainly can reduce that type of financial obligation. Also, to create the potential for year-round construction. Most places in this country have severely limited on-site construction weather, maybe 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, but many, many severe limitations. Flexibility after initial occupancy. Most places where most people live are designed once. They are very, very, very rarely changed. You have flexibility and control over your furniture, over the clothing you have on, but beyond that, you are inhibited. You have to make your lifestyle conform to the facility in which you live. You will see some examples of some European projects where they have a capability to alter and change as their lifestyle increases in numbers, as they change, become more passive or more active in their daily routine. Another big potential, one of the projects you will see has the capability to be disassembled with no waste whatsoever above the ground, totally taken to another site. And as we look at the potential reuse and adaptability, and so we do not have to discard things when they pass on. Now, honestly, there are also some problems, and I think it's only fair to share some of the major problems with you. There's a tremendous amount of resistance from trade and labor organizations for the fear of loss of on-site employment opportunity. There has been some criticism, and justifiably so, about the over degree of standardization, sometimes monotonous due to lack of variety. Another problem which is very hard to overcome, and that is the fear of lack of quality control. A lot of people believe that they cannot see it being built, that they cannot witness the effort, that something is wrong with it. It's cheaper. It is some way inferior. And this certainly is not true. I think the most severe criticism of most of the things we saw, and this would be said, I'm sure, of a European traveling this country and looking at the same thing, would be very, very little recognition of user needs. You will see things that were made for some type of market, some gain that way financially, but some of the user needs are suffering a lot. Why did this all get started in Europe? Mainly as a result of World War II, when there were millions of people homeless and there was a need for immediate shelter. What did they have to work with? Mainly concrete. Most of the steel had been used or consumed as a result of war game efforts, and they were restricted to wood in some cases and generally concrete. Where were the sites? And initially or immediately the sites were in bombed out, burned out areas, sometimes in urban areas. They soon found that due to the time restraints, many suburbia things, as we would call them in this country now, were soon to develop due to the fact that they didn't have to clean up or prepare the site in any way, ultimately into new towns and now all over. I think one of the evolutionary things that they are experiencing, that our country is also experiencing, is trying to reduce the housing-only gigantic blocks. You will see projects from as small as about 12 families per unit to one project that has 27,000 people in one single building. And that, needless to say, is a bit much. With that brief kind of introduction, let's proceed through. We've got about 840 slides, 45 minutes, and I think we can keep it under control. Our path of travel originated in London, and we, by necessity, took in some of the historical and more tourist kinds of things, and we'll capture a couple of those just to put in perspective the overall kind of setting that we were confronted with. Some of the highlights of the London area. The first project that we looked at, we were in London just a couple days at the beginning and then came back for about 10 days at the end, was Bloomsbury. Bloomsbury's on the near north side of London. Precast concrete and poured-in-place concrete with the greenhouse balcony concept. These greenhouses supposedly have the capability to be rearranged or so sized according to the desires of the occupants. However, if you look at them very carefully, you see that essentially no alteration has happened since that initial capability was built. From London, we proceeded on to Paris by a train, hovercraft, and back on the train. I might say we experienced a nice bomb scare coming out of Charing Cross when the Pakistanis blew up the Charing Cross train station, or the bridge south of it, but otherwise encountered no major problems. Paris, the first couple days in Paris, we spent hitting most of the major cultural kinds of things, religious facilities, and I think you have to look very carefully at the major efforts of those that have been there before you. And it becomes really a sense of marvel and wonderment as you try to recognize their accomplishments, both from an engineering standpoint, from an architectural standpoint, and certainly from the construction people that had the wherewithal and the technology to put things together. Notre Dame, an absolutely unbelievable facility. If you look at the just pure dimensions, how they got things where they did with the degree of quality control. And a lot of these quality control capabilities we still don't possess regularly today. Eiffel Tower Park. The tower itself, I'm sure everyone is familiar. I think one of the most interesting things, once ascending most of the way up, to look in the middle slide to the west, or to the east, excuse me, and you can see some of the rather routine, traditional old Paris. If you turn and look to the opposite horizon, you can see the beginning of a total new city out there. A lot of events with a programmed population of 2 million, and we will move out there in just a minute. In the city of Paris itself, there have been imposed very, very strict and I think very good rules and regulations trying to maintain the atmosphere that was there. As a result, you've got a go a little bit beyond the urban core to find some examples of some more recent things. These are projects from the late 60s, essentially precast concrete panel construction elements. A little bit of variety, but again, the introduction of quite a bit of monotony. We went out to CNIT, the National Congress for Industry and Technology, a large exhibit hall that we'll move inside in a minute. And fortunately, while we were there, they had on exhibit a variety of different fiberglass and synthetic living shells. You can see a group of them in the upper left, tied together on the river, right next to the Eiffel Tower, and some self-contained units of a variety of profiles in the other shots. Moving inside this facility, most of the European countries seem to have a lot more pride in our construction products and inventories of construction products than we do in this country. They very carefully exhibit these things and make aware to the general public and to the design types, the capabilities, the range of things to select from, and put them out where people can see them, something beyond the printed page. Going west out of Paris to the area of La Défense, you see the beginning of this new urban pedestrian living situation. It's very, very difficult to begin to understand why some of these things have come about. In this particular situation, there's about 30 to 35 of these towers. They range from about 18 to 35 stories. It's a slip-form concrete process with 3 different shapes of porthole-type windows. Trying to study it carefully to find out the rhyme or reason where they go. I certainly can't diagnose why. The only thing that is for sure is the outside is ceramic tile, and it appears to be a cloud kind of pattern on them so that it blends in well with the background. You can see some naked ones in the foreground and some of those that begin to become camouflaged with almost mirror-like reflections on them. Now, if you look at the glass things downtown, you'll see that they borrow from their surrounding environment. There's nothing to borrow from here because they're all hard, so they've attempted to paint or apply some type of cosmetics to the surface of these things. In that same area, there's about 20 of these ziggurat-shaped elements, combination precast concrete and poured-in-place concrete with a storefront type of frontal. A little closer look at the same thing. You'll see that the quality of construction continues to improve as we go from France to Italy and into Germany and Denmark especially, where you'll find very, very good quality control in most cases. Most projects, as we mentioned, were concrete. We did come across a few that were steel, skeleton construction. This particular one is very lightweight steel frame where the units then were brought and pretty much rolled into place, kind of like a file drawer goes into a file cabinet. If you don't like to live in this type of housing situation, then we went down the road where a little place is a little bit more luxurious for contrast. And from there on to the next place where one is absolutely bewildered. I certainly was. Very few spaces have I ever entered where you feel just completely humbled to have the privilege to enter the space and to think for a few minutes and really wonder how people were able to challenge themselves so successfully over such a long period of time and maintain the continuity of effort and desire and construction quality control to get something like this built. And then it's also remarkable if you look at all the destructive kinds of things that have happened around some of these great cathedrals that they have had the privilege of surviving. Surrounding Paris, from about 40 to 100 kilometers out, are a variety of bedroom kinds of communities. I wouldn't really call them new towns because they have very little else there except some survival kinds of shopping areas and housing. This is an example at Montereau, southeast of Paris. There's programmed to be about 70,000 people here. That's in the low 60s right now. There are 10 or 12 different manufacturers. Again, precast concrete panels, a little bit of poured in place to hold it in place, and some metal storefront. Rather dismal. I think as you begin to follow these projects, you will see that the amount of outdoor space as you climb higher and higher that you can say is your own, whether it's a patio or deck or some other type of recessed hole in the wall, gets greatly reduced. This is one of the first projects that we came across where people have some control over their own exterior. If you look very carefully, especially at the bottom middle slide, you will see a different arrangement of the exterior makeup. This is so that you can choose to have your own penetrations where you want them, either for passage or for vision. Also, in good weather months, you can take some of those panels and place them closer on the inside, thus reducing your interior private space, but increasing your exterior private space, so that you have some opportunity to respond to some weather conditions as well as your own indoor-outdoor. Trying to pick up some highlights all the way along. This is a bridge by my art, and I tried to see some things that were not necessarily first, but were very significant accomplishments. And those people, that especially student types, if you look very carefully at bridge construction, I think it is probably one of the most authentic and truthful statements structurally that you find, and this is a good example of that kind of expression. In Geneva, we came across the single largest building that we were able to witness. This particular project houses 27,000 people. That's essentially 1/3 the population of the city of Muncie, and there are a lot of very daring things about it. For example, if you look at the upper right-hand corner slide, that building's about 360 feet high. It's 34 stories, I believe, or 35 stories. That little notch right up at the top is a pedestrian street. Now, can you imagine living up there with about a 30-inch railing and having your children running along with the 200 or 320 feet straight down? I can't believe it, but they do it all the time. And obviously there's some level of, control there that's different. This place is really a complete city. It has its own religious facilities, its own shops, its own markets, providing some kind of employment, supposedly to the tune of about 4,000 people. Realizing with 27,000 people, unless you've got a very, very bad family ratio, you're still short 3,000 or 4,000 jobs. So it is, in effect, a bedroom community providing some of its own employment opportunity. Some additional shots. Unfortunately, it was a very rainy day, and you cover as much territory as we did. You didn't have a chance to go back or not go. And this middle shot is taken from about 2.5 or 3 miles away with a wide angle. I think you can get some idea of the lay of the land and how it fits, and the beautiful Mont Blanc, which is unfortunately covered up, lies immediately behind it. And that gave us enough desire that we thought we'd better get into the Alps seriously. And we did take a day and go into Zermatt, and it's just absolutely unbelievable. I've been to the Rockies in this country, and there's really not much of a comparison. And it was a good place to get our battery charged before we head into Italy, because when you go up the Alps in Switzerland, you come down in Italy, you're in an immediate sprint. If you've ever witnessed the driving in Italy, you've been to the 500 in this state. Well, the 500 is a 365-day event there, and we try to stay right with them with our little Renault. Pisa, we couldn't miss that. It was a tremendous contrast as we went into Italy to see the vast number of remains of accomplishments from many, many generations in the foreground. And one good contrast about this particular facility versus many of the other older sites was the fact that it remains in good condition and has been taken care of, and hopefully will be with us for a long time. Rome, a city that I don't think needs very much explanation, except to say that we were there for 6 days, had many, many opportunities to penetrate new kinds of things, found essentially nothing. The economy there hasn't provided opportunities to create very many new things. There's a lot of adaptive use, and the only significant housing project, let me catch a couple other background things, the Forum, the Coliseum. The only project that we're able to come across that was anything larger than a 4 or 8 family unit was this one single project on the west of town. Their technology at this point was the most advanced that we saw. We did find some other projects where we were able to carry on conversation with the people. They are very much interested in maintaining their kind of stick by brick and brick by brick technology so that they do not have to displace anybody. They don't have to worry about learning new kinds of things. The hand-me-down on-site construction effort that we used to have in this country, passing down through generations, is still very prevalent there, and you can see a lot of examples of that kind of thing. Going into Florence, we had a lot of things that we wanted to see there, desperately see there. And we had heard rumors and watched on the American television prior to even leaving for the trip, and heard many descriptions of what a strike is like. And you see labor strikes in this country. But Italy is unique in a lot of ways, and this is one of the ways. When they have a strike, they shut the entire country down. I mean, everybody quits. You drive on the interstate free, you can't get in or out of your hotel, you can't get in groceries without police escorts, and it's kind of a survival at your own risk set of circumstances. This happened. It was supposed to be for many days, and fortunately it only lasted for 4 hours. So we had to exit the city. That little sign on the Medici Chapel, it was the word Ciso, which seemed to creep up absolutely everywhere, which I understand in Italian means closed. But this created an opportunity for us to sample a little lifestyle that, again, we have read about, studied about many, many years ago. But to spend a few days in Venice, to try to mix with the people, mix with the birds, mix with the water, is really an interesting experience, and it definitely is a tremendous contrast to everything else that we saw, which was severely hard compared to the softness of this city. Had to throw that in there. Most people think it snows all the time in Innsbruck. We were there 3 weeks after the Olympics. It was 75 to 80 degrees. As a matter of fact, during the Olympics, there was not adequate snow for the Olympic facilities, and the Austrian Army was sent into the mountains to load snow onto trucks and bring it back to the various ski and sled facilities for the winter athletic participation. The 90-meter jump. From an engineering standpoint, we tried to hit every major kind of thing in addition to housing that we could come across. This is a bobsled run. It cost about $6 million in 1964. It has been remodeled a little bit for this particular run, made more safe. But it's an absolute just marvel. You can see the plan of it in the upper left, and then we were able, due to the weather conditions, able just to walk through some of it. And it would be a remarkable ride, I'm sure. Innsbruck is a very low kind of city, sitting in the valley, but popping up out of it on various different locations are some housing blocks. I don't think it's very fortunate, and I'm sure it's a result of some short-term boom in economy as a result of Olympic Games. But you're witnessing here a couple combination precast and poured-in-place concrete structures. There were some other much more exciting kinds of things. This is a middle school or junior high school, which is precast concrete panels arranged in a variety of ways to create the surface conditions as you see in comparing the upper slide and the lower slide, and they're both built with the same kinds of pieces. One of the most interesting systems projects we saw was also in Innsbruck, and this is some precast concrete logs that have a silver asbestos coating all over them to serve as a gasket and also as a weatherproofing membrane. Supposedly this building is designed so that it can be rearranged to respond to the different needs on the inside, as different studio arrangements and supportive spaces need alteration. But again, looking at it very closely, either they've camouflaged it very well or it indeed has not chosen to be altered. I don't think anyone can spend very much time in Munich without visiting their circus. That hippo that you see in the upper right-hand side was about 30 inches from my wife for about 2 minutes while the camera jammed. Or you could have seen her in some hysterics too. Munich was one of the cities that we visited that was really devastated during the war. There are many bad things about the war when you look at loss of life and loss of a lot of other things that naturally can never be replaced. But sometimes, if you look carefully, there are some good byproducts. And I think some of the things that have happened surrounding the city and that are now happening in the inner city are very, very positive and very, very good. The creation of the Olympic site facilities for the 1972 Games certainly was a boom to the city. The amount of money that came in from other countries created opportunities and stimulus to develop not only housing, of which for the Olympics alone they created 28,000 new housing units. You can see some of the Olympic housing site in the bottom of the middle slide. We'll go out there and look at it more carefully in just a minute. Obviously the facilities surrounding you are by Friato, and they are just absolutely fantastic. one other good thing, most of the Olympic sites that we saw were in a very ill state of repair because, from what we could understand, they weren't programmed to be reused or used by the public in their vicinity very much. This particular facility, the water area, the natatorium in the upper right, is a 24-hour facility, either for public use, instructional swimming, or competitive swimming. The other things are used as regularly as our high school and YMCA and Boy Scouts kinds of facilities are. So they are getting good use. They are in excellent condition. They have not been vandalized at all. The Olympic housing site, this particular block, has 20,000 students, or 20,000 occupants. It is a privately owned housing corporation. There's a tremendous waiting list. The quality control of construction appears to be good. There seems to be adequate variety. You have enough outdoor space to go along with your indoor space. Another housing site, this was for students and for competitive athletes. There are 2,000 of these. This is the most compact living unit that we witnessed. On the lower level is a space about 3.5 by 3.5 meters. That's about 11 foot square. On the upper level is a balcony or mezzanine, which is really a sleeping loft. Unfortunately, it's too dark. We were in one, but couldn't get any pictures. Which is a sleeping loft or a study loft, and you have your own private little balcony on the outside. Until the first of last year, there was very strict restrictions on what you could do on the outside. You could do nothing. And as soon as they lifted that, then people have chosen to decorate or express themselves in a variety of ways. See, bringing some landscape into a rather hard environment in the middle top, and you can look from there yourself. On the perimeter of Munich, all the way around the city, there's a variety of new kinds of housing types, trying to recognize the indoor-outdoor relationship, perhaps better than most other places. I think quality control construction, again, is good. Again, you see mainly concrete with some metal or plastic kind of panels as infill material, making a definition between the inside and the outside. For the press at the 72 Olympic Games was this complex created for 6,000 people, which is west of the Olympic site, and has a few more niceties and plus kinds of things as far as other facilities for additional members of the family, so that it isn't so hard when you go from building to some type of transportation system and back and forth to work every day. I think the sighting here was one of the best examples of that kind of thing that we were able to witness. We did have the very brief opportunity to go into East Berlin for a day, and we've got some shots of some of the things that you hear about, think about, and wonder about, and feel extremely insecure about while participating. And naturally, you see a lot of memorial kinds of things. The Brandenburg Gate at the bottom, their National War Memorial with the goose step people coming in from the bottom right, and one kind of on the sly shot of Checkpoint Charlie at the top. We didn't have very much opportunity to penetrate their housing situation except in some conversation with a guide, which was extremely cooperative. But we tried to get some sample kinds of things, some replacement facilities that were built immediately after the war to things that are being built now. I'm not sure the final disposition of the unit in the upper right or middle bottom. They appear that they're going to be stacked somehow, perhaps low-rise, realizing that they're just frame construction. On the other hand, the upper left was a very common housing example, not to suggest that it was throughout the city at all, because it certainly wasn't. The city is more like you see in the upper top, with the exception of the fountains, and there are not a whole lot of those. But we did see distributed throughout the city these small little farm complexes or individual landlord situations on the upper left. The city of West Berlin was probably the most American of all the cities we encountered. Again, very severely damaged in the war, but a lot of new things and a lot of really outstanding good things are happening. There is one, you just catch that bottom one in the middle. One of the unique things about the Germans and the combination and integration of their construction industry, the products people, the design types, the universities, they seem to have a much stronger marriage than is possessed in this country. As a result, there are a lot of cooperative efforts, of which we'll see some examples of, that have created project opportunities and have gone back and evaluated them. This is a project from 1957 that brought together 36 world-famous architects to begin to participate in their reconstruction. And there are 36 examples strung out over the map, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, and this is really in right downtown West Berlin. This is an older project indicating the fact that not everything that is in the past 15 or 20 years has been built with the most advanced factory kind of technology. This is a very traditional project, but a very pleasant space, and there's actually 2 donuts here with circulation between and pedestrian area in the center. We had an opportunity to go through the largest precast concrete housing systems component people that we could find. This particular unit, this particular factory builds 198 units a day. And if you multiply that out over the year, that's about 70,000 units that this particular factory puts out. They make 66 units a shift, and they run 3 shifts long. It's very interesting in talking to the people here, and we were there most of the day, and looking around very carefully and not kind of recognizing any German people in the production area. And it was very interesting. Their people that work there are Greeks and Turks and Yugoslavs. They get them for not very much money. Their training program is 20 minutes. They show them twice how to do the task. The third time, if they do it, they're hired. If they don't do it, they're fired. And that, I think, goes along with the efficiency of their entire country. And I don't know what they do with the ones that are fired, but maybe they put them in some of the units. This is an on-site example of one of their construction efforts. A lot of their general contractors are also precast people, due to the fact that this is where the market is and this is where the largest sums of income can be found, and a lot of them have aligned themselves this way. This is one of the most interesting projects we saw. This is also in West Berlin. It's a school. They have built 11 of these. These schools are so built to be disassembled, and they are relocatable down to the ground plane. The underground utility extensions and the foundations are lost. The components are reasonably small. The oldest one is now 3 years old. One other advantage of this is also if the community where the school is sited needs additional space, then they can very quickly accommodate by placing additional classroom space or whatever the type of educational space would be required with components that fit, so you don't have bad joinery problems and mismatch between yesterday's work and tomorrow's work. We saw another one of these schools. We saw 2 of them, and they were very much alike from the catalog of components. The actual spatial arrangement and the composite makeup of spaces and volumes and geometry was completely different. Norm, need help? Upper left. Thank you. Corbusier, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's very interesting to see the accomplishment of one of our great masters and to see as imprinted right on the building some of the rules by which he played the game with his modular man in the foreground. Got a breakdown in upper left. Bill. Right adjacent to that, to Corbu's block, is the 36 Olympic Games site. Again, one of the very few sites that we're able to witness that was intact. If you happen to see the special on Jesse Owens on TV a couple weeks ago, it was filmed in this setting. They have since added the protection canopy on the sidelines. This project, of all the projects we witnessed, is probably the most comprehensive from knowing and understanding what's really going on. The people that live here are evaluated, fill out a questionnaire, and their needs are evaluated every day. The circumstances that create the shell that they live in, the subdivision of spaces, the opportunities for open and closed spaces on the outside, patios, decks, recessed areas, more space, less space, are then responded to as quickly as possible, whether it's the same day or the next day. There's trailer loads of spare parts sitting on the site attempting to provide the immediacy of response. You can see that it looks like it's undone. It's intentionally that way, so that they're not trying to put people into something that they don't feel comfortable in trying to alter. It'd be very much like living in a jungle gym. There is a design office in it. There are some of these project coordinators in it, and a variety of residential types in it. This, again, is right downtown, right adjacent to the Technical University. could hardly spend very much time in Germany without taking advantage of some of the beer and the means of transporting it around. From there we went north back through East Germany on one of their most famous highways, E6, which you see going north on the middle slide, both top and bottom. It's unbelievable that highways that in our country, this would be a parallel to an interstate, to travel for about 188 miles on this road, seeing only 4 or 5 vehicles the entire time that were moving and maybe 10 or 15 that were parked. With no sense of direction, there are no road signs, you just kind of aim it and hope that you don't get off the road because you're not sure what the consequences are if you should happen to get off the road. It was interesting in trying to get out of West Berlin that day. We spent over an hour there because the guards were tired of having checked through trucks earlier in the morning. We left at a little bit before 6 o'clock to make sure we could hit a ship for Sweden safely. Copenhagen, probably the biggest and best city from a variety of standpoints that we encountered. Extremely friendly people and a concern for design everywhere, not only in costume, in textiles, in hardware, in buildings, in just the overall makeup. And we were very fortunate there to have the accommodation by a faculty member from the Royal Academy who was able to spend a lot of time with us and show us around. We've got a couple older projects here, and this one is here to make a point. In 1863, the city of Copenhagen experienced a very severe plague. The type of people that survived the plague the most were the doctors. There were so many doctors that survived, they had no patients. So they went into the construction business. And this is a project that they created ultimately, originally for themselves, and now for some members of their welfare state. The city of Copenhagen is surrounded on the perimeter by just project after project from all different scales, from 1,500 to 2,000 occupants to many thousands of occupants. This is an example of one of those. Again, concrete, combination precast, combination poured in place. Probably the finest mass-produced complex that we were in. You can see the plan in the upper left. It consists, I believe, of 11 different manufacturers. This is due west of Copenhagen. We had an opportunity to go in this. I think one of the biggest differences to be said about Danish design versus the other things with respect to housing, almost every one of the other systems that we witnessed were in some description cells. They had limitations as a result of transportation on the dimension of pieces or the weight of pieces they could bring to the site. The Danish situation is much more open, a lot more free-flowing space, a lot more penetration of light on the inside, and I certainly think a lot more pleasant to want to live in. This is an example of another project on that same site. Some leaving shots as we were preparing to exit Denmark the first time and go east to Sweden. All right. This particular town of Gothenburg, right north of Gothenburg, is an entire new community, again for 70,000 people. 70,000 seems to be a magic number for these new town or satellite kind of communities. There are about 16 or 17 different manufacturers represented on this site, each one of them providing living facilities from about 800 to 3,000 or 4,000 different people. And this is an example of one of those. A lot of the projects that we saw had excellent quality control. You see some beginning examples here of, as we go from this point forward, you'll see some examples of some problems that even experience greater mishaps. I think one of the things here, you look at the accommodation and the recognition of user needs at the lower level are quite good. You see some generous kind of outdoor space opportunities, but as you move up, you see the people only receive a recessed little slot. And this certainly, in my opinion, is insufficient. Another project in that same city, this essentially is a townhouse. You can see the map on the upper left that begins to recognize the variety of sites, the variety of contractors participating on this single site. We get involved in a little bit of metal for the first time on the outside. We haven't seen very much of it up to this point. From there over to Stockholm. Stockholm many years ago was certainly one of the pioneers in factory-built housing, but most of those things are really outdated now, with the except from a planning concept. They're very, very rich to experience, but from a technology standpoint, most of them are kind of passé. We were able, though, to find a couple sites where some rather new things are going on. This is the first project that we saw that actually had a tinted concrete. We saw a lot of aggregate situations, but here they actually came and tinted the concrete. Some of it is painted, some of it is tinted. You can see the more tan colored is actually tinted, and the orange panels have been painted. It's very interesting. If you look carefully, you will begin to recognize the fact that the only difference in most of these projects is the attempted sculptural effect of some type of exterior space, whether it's a balcony or a sunscreen. And the unit on the inside normally has a window at each end and is maybe 4 or 5 meters wide combination, or sometimes 6 meters wide if it's a double unit. And it's a very tunnel kind of experience to have to live in. The only time we saw the word Indiana after we left here was in a leather shop in downtown Stockholm. I think one of the things about the European cities that our cities don't have very much of, and that's a lot of life and a lot of spirit in the urban core itself. And I don't know whether it takes creating game kinds of things or a continuous caravan of activities, whether it be a market in the lower right or a band in the upper center, to create this kind of stimulus, but we certainly need to do something to have an ongoing spirit that almost all of the cities that we witnessed participate in. At this point in time, we needed to take some kind of a break. We're about 6 or 7 weeks into the trip, and a long-time desire of mine and our family was to see snow at some unbelievable level, so we thought we might as well go to Norway where it's in abundance, and that we did. This is the route to Norway. Absolutely beautiful scenery, beautiful countryside. One of the many Viking ships. An interesting thing about that particular specimen, Viking ships, they don't find them in the water. They find them in burial grounds, because if you were an upper, then you were buried in your dugout or in your ship. And they have excavated them with some very careful digs and have been able to reclaim several of them. Going from that point farther up into Norway, into the fjord country, which is the most indescribable landscape that I could ever imagine that was anywhere. We tried to prepare ourselves extremely well for this trip, and I think we did, but we certainly weren't prepared for the intensity and the variety and just the overall magnitude of Norway. It's much different than the Alps or the Rockies or any other mountain range. You don't go up one side and 4 hours later you're down the other side and out of it. The mountains in Norway, you go up one side and about a day and a half later and 300 miles you're down out of the other side if you make it. And we didn't make it. Nobody made it for this particular 4 or 5 week period. There's only 3 roads that go across the country of Norway. The 2 southern routes were closed, and we got partway across the northern route when it just quit. This is E68. This is the main road that goes across Norway. There's a village on the right. You can see a few rooftops poking out. The snow at this point is about 6 to 8 feet deep along the highway. And these are what are called snowfields. These are valleys within mountain ranges that maintain snow coverage the majority of the year. Later on, you see some snow of about 25 feet deep on the highway. I promise not to show that one, and if my youngster screams, he's entitled to that. This particular night, we were driving along, and there was no place to go, so we created our own everything. They say better out than in, so. The stay the previous night was mandated by the road condition at the left. We were flying down this highway, finally got up to about 40 kilometers. That's about 24, 25 miles an hour. We're really moving out, and it stops. It's aborted, as most of the roads are in that area, by the fjords. The next morning we got on one of the little boats similar to the one you see there, a little bit larger than that, and proceeded on to the town of Gudvangen, as you see the sign in the upper left. Having arrived at Gudvangen, unfortunately we couldn't drive and take pictures at the same time. We were ascending this 30-degree incline with our little Renault that had been very good to us up until that time, going full speed, 5 kilometers an hour, first gear, uphill, sliding backwards down the hill. And that literally scared it out of us till we found out how to properly position our total available movable weight over the front of the car, and we made it to the top safely. The snow got a little bit deeper as we came south in Norway. You see now it's about 20 or 25 feet on the side of the road. I don't know, I cannot believe the magnitude of effort necessary to keep this road going, to keep this road open. This is the only road open west out of Oslo, going to Bergen or Stavanger, and it was even closed farther down the road, so we couldn't make it any farther. But this is the distance that we were able to navigate. One of the many little village inns that we stayed at in the upper left. Kids must be kids, and they certainly had a good time in the mountain streams of the southern part of the country. We had 3 major sailing ventures. This was the second one without problems. We've got some shots coming of some severe problems that we encountered a little bit later on. This is coming back to Denmark. In the town of Aarhus, in the country of Denmark, there are 2 schools of architecture, one in Copenhagen and one in Aarhus. They're both about 2.5 times the size of our college here, both having approximately 1,000 students. They both have excellent technical arms, and this particular campus and city is also very much involved in restoration. And these are buildings that they have reclaimed from all over the country and have positioned them here in an urban setting, in a city setting in downtown Aarhus. The church that you see in the distant background on the right was by a previous guest faculty member here, Mr. Fries. Their School of Architecture, if you think that we were in temporary or bad facilities across the street, you should have to or want to be a student in the facility that's in the upper left. It looks great on the outside, but on the inside it's rather desperate kinds of condition. One of the most interesting shots that we saw where housing was integrated with some other type of activity more than just a token shop was this complex that literally wraps up and over the top of this shopping mall. I think one of the neat things about this, we talked about earlier the Danes being good design types. I think the truthfulness and consistency and expression of not only the structure but of the environmental systems, the ductwork as you see in the upper center, as you see on the right-hand side, the increased volume necessary for heat loss at entrances has been expressed, and I think very vividly, and this facility certainly has a lot of life in it. On the other hand, we drive about 15 or 20 miles out into the country, absolutely nothing developed anywhere around it. We come across this facility. It's very, very kind of unique to us. We see here, absolutely adjacent to nothing, they've taken this project to no crisis as far as land shortage. They've taken this entire living block or blocks, and have elevated it above the ground plane to create parking to get the cars, when they are parked, out of the way. When they are moving, they are in roadways that can be seen. And then they create little tiny gardens for the occupants up above. And then on the edge, as you see in the upper center slide, you do get back down to the ground plane again. Going from there south back into Germany to Hamburg, we see some examples of some very early from some very early post-war housing efforts. Very repetitive, somewhat over-standardized, kind of seen one, seen them all situation. And I think you'll see the progress from this point forward, tremendously forward, with the next few shots. Hamburg Harbor, something that if you're ever in that vicinity, you certainly want to experience, to be involved in the intensity of water traffic. And things are moving literally in all types of packages all around the city. From there down to Hanover, a city that has been a participant in a variety of housing competitions, and some examples of those competitions are as follows. Again, mostly concrete. Here you see everyone does have a balcony. They are very standardized. The exterior of the unit, the window makeup, the amount of space, everything is repetitive. If you go right across an areaway, both of these units look at one another. You see some opportunity to create some individual expression on the outsides of these. with the material that the people can manipulate easily. In this case, it's a canvas awning of some different shapes. We couldn't figure out quite why, but all the red face east and all the blue face west, and there are no windows on the north or south. But you do see that the people do have some capability to begin to express themselves or hide themselves from the outside. Another project in the same locale, you see some terracing here at the lower level to create some variety and some opportunity for indoor-outdoor living experiences. But again, once you climb very high, the outdoor space becomes kind of a negative, a hole left, a recess in the above areas. Woollen, Germany, probably our best find, and this was thanks directly to Uwe and people that he put us in contact with. This project is called Habitat. It was a project created and designed to give people that live there a rather good opportunity to alter their exterior, to create some flexibility for the container that they're going to live in. Here, this exterior glass panel can change its positions. It can become more inside or more outside, depending upon weather conditions, depending upon orientation, depending upon the type of space that you want. You can see, if you look carefully at the bottom slide in the middle, that there are little notches in the ceiling to respond and respect a joint condition to allow the panel to properly engage. The project is just finishing construction, and there are a couple of different families have moved in. Immediately adjacent to that is one of the few projects that is built out of metal that we witnessed. This project is like this school in Berlin is built to be taken apart. And this project is built from very small parts, has by far the most complete catalog inventory of components that we're able to see, from planners to stairs to structure to mechanical things to windows to all kinds of openings to corners, inside corners, support elements, the total spectrum of things. One tool is required to put this together, and that's a type of what we would call an Allen wrench to engage this washer type of connection so that it can be taken apart without any damage to the pieces. This is the project that has the capability. Let's say that we're sitting here on Monday night, and on Friday night in your residence you're going to entertain a lot of people, and you don't have the capability or the space to provide that type of activity or accommodate that type of activity. You get on the phone and you describe your needs to them, and they assist you in determining what kind of additional space that you need. They will bring to you, you might be on the 12th level of this thing, and cantilever out there for you or hang for you or put on top of your unit the additional space to satisfy your immediate requirements. Also, on the slower change, if you look at family cycling from starting out with 2 and perhaps swelling up to 3, 4, or 5 total family members, and then back down again to 2, to have this capability to add or subtract space, whether it's on an immediate situation or over a long term, certainly is a beneficial thing. And I think things like this we will begin to see more of. Also, I think the variety here, due to the range of components that they had to select from, has been put together quite well. From there into Cologne, again, to take a look at one of the major pieces of European work. Sorry about that, we're still in Cologne. But the cathedral here, again, is something that if you are ever in that part of the country and you want to just marvel and wonder for a while and slow down and have a chance to rethink for a few minutes, this is the kind of place that you want to be able to park yourself into. Bonn is another city in Germany that has participated extensively in housing competitions. It's been the selected site for several. This particular one was a German project. Really mentioning that because some of the other participants were not, and you will see some examples of those in the next slide. Here again, I think you see quite a bit of variety. You do not have the kind of scene one, scene them all, A-B rhythm, or just A, something to break up the monotony of that kind of effort. This particular project is immediately adjacent to the previous one. This project was designed and built by a firm in Helsinki, transported by water to this site, and at that point the firm went bankrupt. Then just now, 3 years after the initial construction of the site, local people are participating in the completion thereof. You can see some problems. Not all the things were good. If you look carefully at the bottom slide, you see just an absolute collision course by dissimilar materials. And construction tolerance is something that it's very hard to educate. It's very hard as a practitioner to understand all the time. And you want to try to prepare yourself to anticipate field coordination problems. From there, seeking a contrast, we went further south along the Rhine to the little German town of Linz. An absolutely remarkable place. The other areas that we were in of large numbers like this have been, to experience a lot of restoration, a lot of things have been brought in. This area was in its original state, and it was just a remarkable contrast for us. And we took a detour over through Luxembourg. This particular palace or castle was originated in the year 1060, and some of it is still with us. From there to Brussels, in Belgium, we found very few examples of anything that was not almost a direct carbon copy of the things that we witnessed before, so we were showing some other city kinds of things. Jumped ahead over there. In the city of Antwerp, we've been looking a lot at new housing and contemporary housing and housing since the war. We took an opportunity to go through a house of one of our great painting masters, Rubens, and look very carefully at things that I'm sure that he had made some contributions to in the design of his facility. And the middle two slides represent that. The slide on the right is a painting of three of which of his are exhibited in the church on the left. It's interesting, you just can't escape McDonald's, and our kids like them anyway, and whenever we had the opportunity, we made do. There's two ways to experience Amsterdam. One is by walking the canal streets and over the bridges, and the other one is by water. And we tried to take advantage of that opportunity and see it in both lights. I might say a word of advice, if you're ever traveling in that vicinity, if you can do it in the spring, it's really a great time to go because you do not have the American tourist lines in front of you at all times. The only place that we did hit that at all was a little bit in London at the end and in Amsterdam. Another particular type of living unit, the windmill, is very interesting. Most living units are there to provide a single kind of function. It's a place where you normally do not do your work. I think faculty member at the University of Kansas, Jim Sterling, the architect, and he shared with us some of his design ideas on use of masonry in some rather different kind of positions. And you see here some brick projecting cantilevered roof kinds of things, and that kind of struck home when we tried to use some of those things when appropriate here. The giant oak on the right is where Robin Hood did his thing a few years back. Also in this area, one is blessed with a lot of richness of efforts of the past. The Rivlow Abbey on the right, the Richmond Castle in the center. And one of the beautiful things about the Moors area is the unrestricted opportunity to go and to walk and to drive and to participate without fences or visual kinds of property lines. And the animals have this opportunity as well as the people that go there to appreciate it. On up to Edinburgh. I went there to kind of get a sample of Scotland. We found very few new kinds of things in the city itself, but the city life environment was really interesting. Again, I think some care for detail in the landscape as well as care for detail in building types. You can see a flower clock, of which there are many throughout Europe. This one is just under construction in the spring. Another one of the engineering wonders, the Firth of Forth Bridge. Many people recognize it as the engineering accomplishment of the last century. I would certainly concur with that. It's fantastic to have the privilege to stand so close to some of these things and just really stand in amazement and wonder how they were ever able to do it. In this case, cover water, span water with the success, and with something that structurally is so very honest. Then we went over to Cumbernauld, a tremendous disappointment. We looked carefully, that little guy is disappointing. He was the brightest spot there. That's why we put him in the center. If you look very carefully at these living units, there are a variety of types on this particular site. There's a lot of decay starting to set in, and perhaps they were built from a technology that wasn't really ready to accommodate this kind of thing. A lot of materials are delaminating, a lot of structures beginning to fail, and the overall place from a state of deterioration is really kind of hurting. Then down to Stratford to catch some of our people that we look very carefully to in literature, Shakespeare's residence in the bottom center. That's one of the many guest houses that we stayed in the upper left. I think it's very important if you travel in countries beyond this country, if you have the opportunity to rub elbows with some of the people, the best way to do it is to stay in as small scale facilities as possible. This one had 2 guest bedrooms. We occupied those for an evening. Were received warmly with tea and everything in the afternoon, and it's a super way to have a first-hand opportunity to converse with the natives of the area. And from there back into London, we naturally had to spend some time in St. Paul's, and this place is another facility that you've got to look at pretty carefully because it's over you, it's under you, it just absolutely encompasses you. And that's the kind of opportunity that we wanted to participate in. The zoo, we got a mad guy in the center on top and 2 beautiful pandas flanking him. Again, there are good works of architecture, not just restricted to housing, but in all kinds of things. Here, the elephant or large mammal house and the aviary on the right. Getting back to housing to wind things up. In London, in the city of London, there are examples all over. There are more examples than you really could almost spend 90 days trying to get involved with. A lot of the housing sites were built initially on bombed out or devastated areas. This one is built on some reclaimed area on the southeast of the city. Combination poured in place and precast with a little bit of masonry for some cosmetic kind of treatment. Another project immediately adjacent to Thamesmead. This very traditional kind of construction from a sculptural standpoint of the exterior, certainly a lot more interesting than a lot of those that we saw. And it's very interesting if you look at a single unit. But again, I think even no matter how good a single thing is, if you have an extreme number of that same thing, then monotonous sets in and you get in trouble again as you start to look down some of these rows. An earlier project, Churchill Gardens, again built with some combination traditional methods and factory-built methods from the curtain wall kind of almost storefront factory-built exterior. Very little opportunity for exterior space except some of those very token kinds of balconies. One of the largest projects for 6,500 people that's presently under construction. You're looking at just the horizontal portion of it here, Barbican on the downtown east side. A giant concrete maze. In fact, these slides really make it look much better than what it actually is because they're just expanses of hard pavement, pedestrian streets above ground. I'm sure that the upper units, which are like penthouse units by description in our country, would be very attractive. But to be inserted in the essentially glass front fishbowl situations down below, I don't really know about. They have tried to bring some water into the site, as you see in the upper right. This is a very good model. In fact, the Hermansons had flown over and were with us at this time, and Dave and I went to take a look at this site together. This model is about 10 or 12 feet in diameter. It has a glass bubble over it that you can't see here. It has different lighting sources so that you can attempt to simulate sun sources. You can elevate it so that you have an opportunity to record it and use it as you so wish. You see here that it is a combination of some high-rise point blocks as well as your mid-rise living units. These particular other slides show the high-rise. In order to get around in London, if you want to go by yourself when the taxis are physically able to run, you go this way. If you want to not go your own way and go the way that they want you to go, you try to go that way. You really want to experience not only the people but the modes of transportation when you have the opportunity. This about winds us up. We're preparing to leave. We arrived with not very much and we're taking home a lot. My little toy on the right, and we had fun with that and still do. I think that's it. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.